Hello everyone. So I've been really enjoying these knife videos I've been doing. Knives are one of the things that I've collected the longest in my life, well over 2 decades at this point. And I got an update today that I have something coming that I'm really excited to do a knife video on. But in order for it to make sense for non-knife people that might watch these, I had to do this video first, and that is a brief history and rundown of one of, if not my favorite knife brand, Buck Knives. So this is going to be just a video talking about the history of buck knives and showing some of the different types of buck knives that I own. I'm a firm believer that everybody should own some type of pocket knife or fixed blade, like not necessarily just for protection and stuff like that. A knife is a tool. You run into stuff every day, multiple times a day, that you need to separate one from something else, or you need to cut something open. Like, yes, the world has a lot of perforated edges nowadays, but you're not always going to run into stuff like that. So I'm a firm believer that carrying a knife is a very useful tool to have on you. So to get into what makes buck knives so significant is we have to go all the way back to 1902 when they started. So in the very beginning in 1902, they started technically in Leavenworth, Kansas. And in Leavenworth, Kansas, a gentleman by the name of Hoyt H. Buck was about 12, 13 years old, trying to contribute to the family income by working in this blacksmith shop that would work on wagons. And it was a two-story shop. And there's a general mercantile up top, and then he would take the wagons down below and work on them and fix them or whatever. And what Hoyt would do when he was a kid is he would take the old files that could no longer be used anymore, and he would turn those files into knives or different metal objects to contribute to the family income. And that snowballed for a couple of decades, to be honest. He met a woman, had kids, ended up moving to the Pacific Northwest, specifically Mountain Home, Idaho. We'll get to the significance of Idaho eventually. Moves up to Mountain Home, Idaho, has a family, and eventually one of his sons decides to go into the military and goes into the Navy and ends up in San Diego, California, while Hoyt is still up in Mountain Home in the basement of his church, just still making knives. He even made knives for the war effort in World War II, making knives that he could send overseas to people that were fighting in the war. And a lot of these designs are going to be based around the same shape as the original K-bar, which is the knife that most Army men, Marines, Navy, everybody used back then. So Buck Knives incorporated in the early 1960s. I believe it was 1961, after Hoyt convinced his son Al to go into the knife business with him. So Hoyt moves down to San Diego. They get a lean-to shop in San Diego where they incorporate and become Buck Knives in 1961. And that's when they come out with their different catalog of knives. And in that catalog, they had a bunch of fixed blades primarily. And some of the originals are, the second most popular knife they make is called the Buck 119. It's a fixed blade, kind of buoy in shape with a clip point, and it's about 6 inches long, full handle, and they're all roughly based on this shape. This is a Buck 120. This is the slightly bigger version of a Buck 119. Buck 119 is 6 inches. This right here is 7 3/8. And if you're familiar with the horror movie franchise Scream, this is the knife that Ghostface, or the murderer in Scream, uses. These are specifically built for hunting primarily. They have what's called a hollow grind, which means they get to a very fine edge and they get razor sharp. This is not an original Buck 120. This is what's called the Buck 120 Pro. It's got some updated materials in the handle and in the blade, but traditionally they are 420 HC steel with a black polyphenolic handle. The polyphenolic handle is made roughly of the same material that bowling balls are made out of. This blade specifically is a different steel known as S35VN, and that just holds an edge longer and it's a little bit more durable. And then the handle is made of OD green micarta, which is more durable than the polyphenolic handles, and it's lighter. So this is what's called the Buck 120 Pro Series. The Pro Series just has the upgraded materials in the traditional look. And this knife specifically was actually the knife that I had on my belt the day of my wedding. I wore this knife on my belt, and then all of my groomsmen wore the smaller version of the Buck 119 and the 120, and that is this guy right here. It's called the Buck 117 Brahma, and perfect size for doing chores and such. It fits my hand like a glove. Like, it's like this handle was built for someone with exactly my hand size. This one's got, I believe, a 4.5-inch blade, and this is a traditional one with the black polyphenolic handle and the 420 high carbon steel. 420 high carbon steel, it's not technically high carbon compared to other knives. Carbon is what makes blades rust, but it's also what makes them more durable. So the more carbon you add to the blade, the more durable it will be, but the more likely it is to rust. Until later in the later part of the 20th century, Buck and a couple other companies came together and came up with a bunch of different powdered super steels, which S35VN is one of them, to really step up the edge retention and the strength of blades. And it just kind of cascaded into what we're dealing with now, where we've got new blade steels coming out like every year to every other year to outcompete what's already out there. So it's kind of a never-ending game, and Buck's always been at the forefront of innovation in that regard, even though they're considered a very traditional knife manufacturer. And I really appreciate that. And then one of the other fixed blades that I have is the Buck 105 Pathfinder. This is another one of the original from 1961 models that they came out with. They also had a slightly shrunk down version of this called the Personal that isn't really made anymore, but I picked this one up. This is the same Pro Series that the 120 was. So it's got the S35VN steel, and it's got the OD green micarta handles. I picked this one up fairly recently. I really enjoyed the shape, and then I got it in my hands, and this is one of the better knife builds that I've ever gotten. The grind is pretty much perfect. It's a little on the thicker side, but that's totally fine because of how the blade is. It's got this really short clip point at the very end. You can definitely tell this is a knife for fishing. I would consider this a very fishing shaped knife. Really enjoy it. I've been carrying this one a lot lately, and wicked sharp. One thing about Buck knives is they always come wicked sharp. Every single one I've ever owned, including this little guy. I found this little guy at a pawn shop a while ago. This is the Buck 373. It's this blade pattern is called a Stockman. A Stockman comes with 3 different blades like this, and traditionally they come with like a primary main clip point or drop point blade like this one being a drop point, and then you've got a spay blade right here. If you don't know what spay means, find someone with dirt on their pants and they'll tell you. So this is a spay blade, and then you've got a sheep's foot right here. So you've got 3 different blades to choose from. One was for like food prep, one was for like hard use, and then traditionally you had like a 3rd blade that you saved, keeping it razor sharp for razor sharp needs. So Buck incorporates in 1961. They come out with a product line with a lot of these fixed blades. And then eventually in 1964, they will create the knife that will pretty much change the folding knife industry as we know it. Around that time, there was a knife called the Folding Hunter that a lot of different companies made. And it was just a hunting knife that was in theory supposed to do the work of a fixed blade that folded in half and you could conveniently keep in your pocket. Well, Buck wanted to take that standard and amplify it, and they did it so well that their brand name essentially just became synonymous with that knife style. Kind of like Kleenex. Like, a Kleenex isn't actually a Kleenex, it's a tissue, but we call it a Kleenex because of the brand name. That's kind of what happened with Buck when they introduced the Buck 110. And a lot of your uncles, fathers, grandfathers probably carried this knife. It is pretty much the quintessential buck knife. From 1965 to 1980, no matter what they did, they could not keep this knife in stock because of what it is. So this one, it's pretty much the same as it was 50 plus years ago. They made some modifications, like they didn't use 420 HC back then in the blade steel, but it's always had dark ebony handles like this, brass bolsters, pins holding the handle together, and then a clip point style blade. As the years went on, the clip point style blade got a little bit more dramatic, and around the turn of the millennium, they started doing different edges on their knives. They're called the Edge 2000, and that was just because the CEO at the time was dissatisfied with how sharp the knives got, so they redid the angle of the grind. So that's where the Buck 110 came in. It was one of the strongest, if not the strongest knife in its class, and it is to this day still one of the most iconic knives ever made. And it's got dozens of different iterations, including another one that I have right here, which is the Buck 110 Hunter Sport. This is essentially just a Buck 110 with thumb studs, so you can deploy it one-handed. It's got some micarta handles, so it's a little bit lighter and a little bit more durable. And instead of being brass bolstered, it has an aluminum frame, so significantly lighter than the Buck 110. The Buck 110 is a fairly heavy knife, significantly lighter. And then in the blade steel, this guy's got S30V, which has the highest edge retention, like one of the highest edge retentions of the super steels. It's what pretty much every super steel is compared to. S30V is the standard. S35VN, like the few fixed blades that I showed you guys, that's going to be a little bit more durable, but S30V is still going to be a lot more slicey in sharpness. But essentially, like, the angle of your edge does more for sharpness than blade steel. So, but still very nice steel. I was going to carry this on my wedding day alongside the Buck 120 in my pocket because it has a pocket clip. But unfortunately, the day of my wedding, I ended up bending the pocket clip really, really bad. And I wasn't able to get it fixed in time. So I went with a slightly different knife that I'll show you in a second. But I took my Leatherman and I actually I fixed most of the pocket clip here. So we'll see if it holds. But so Buck releases the Buck 110, and it's a popular knife. Everybody uses it. Well, it's a very popular knife among sailors. And there is a ship that is docked in San Diego for the Navy, and a bunch of the sailors on this specific ship use Buck 110s. Well, one day there was a fight that broke out on this specific ship, and I believe it was in the early 70s, like very early 70s. A fight breaks out on this ship, and a Buck 110 is used in the fight, and somebody stabs another soldier with a Buck 110. And because of that, the head of the Navy comes out and says that nobody on any Navy ship can have a blade that is longer than 3 inches anymore because of that incident. The Buck 110 has a 3 3/4 inch blade. So Buck heard about this because, like, obviously it greatly impacted their sales. So what does Buck do? They come out with the exact same knife, only they make it essentially like 2 3/4 inches long. So you have the Buck 110, and then this is the Buck 112. The Buck 112 is also called the Ranger, and the reason it's called the Ranger is because the name of the ship that the stabbing happened on was the USS Ranger. So I think that's pretty hilarious. But the Buck 112 is a very popular knife, more so than the 110 for a lot of people, because it's got a smaller handle. This Buck 110, I've got really big meat paws for hands, so it fills my hand pretty well. But for most people, that's a lot of knife to just carry every day unless you're out in the woods or hunting or something. So Buck 112, a lot more carryable, a lot lighter, a little bit shorter of a blade, so it's easier to control. And you've got that nice little curve right here in the bolster to really get your fingers locked in there. And it locks in pretty nicely. And This was actually a gift from my wife for, I want to say, Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day last year, my wife got me this. So I enjoy the Buck 112 so much that I actually have a Buck 112 in the same sport model that I have my Buck 110. And because I bent the clip on this one, I actually carried my Buck 112 Sport the day of my wedding as well. This also has S30V blade steel, exact same specifications as this guy, only just in a slightly smaller package. But I really enjoy these knives. I really enjoy the pocket clip versions that are a little bit lighter, but I also enjoy the classics too. And the classics come with really nice leather sheaths. The sheaths specifically are made in Mexico. All knives are made in the US. They have some imports, but a vast majority of their knives are made in the USA. So that's a good majority of the buck knives that I have, but they are a 5th generation family owned knife company. They have had 4 CEOs, all from the same family, starting with Hoyt Buck, and then they went to Al Buck, his son, and then they went to Chuck Buck, who was Al's son, and now they have CJ, who is Chuck's son, running the company. And then I believe even even CJ's kids and grandkids also work for the company. And Buck is based out of Post Falls, Idaho, which is way north Idaho, but they haven't always been in Idaho. They incorporated in San Diego, like I said. They stayed in San Diego until 2005, but it was so expensive to manufacture in California that they had a family meeting and they decided it was best to pack up and come back to the Pacific Northwest, which is where his grandfather spent most of his time raising his family. Instead of going to Mountain Home, though, which would have been really cool because that's a lot closer to Boise than Post Falls is, they went to Post Falls up north, built a manufacturing facility, and now they've got a huge facility up there with a museum and everything attached. I really want to go. I've been to Post Falls before, but I've never been to the Buck factory. I would love to go one day. Definitely a bucket list thing to do. But yeah, I think I really enjoy Buck knives because the story of Buck knives also kind of reminds me of myself a little bit, in the regard of they're not from Idaho, but they came to Idaho and just flourished. So I think on a deep down level, I really enjoy that story because I kind of also feel the same way a little bit in that regard. But I'm really excited for what I've got coming, and I wanted to give a brief history on Buck knives before it got here, so that way the impact of what it is kind of just sinks in a little bit more. So I appreciate everybody that likes watching these and likes learning about knives, because like I said, it's one of the things I've collected longer than anything else. So yeah, I've got a lot of knives to put away. But that's the gist of Buck knives. Like, they've got such a vast history and such an interesting history that I'm barely scraping the surface. That's pretty much just the entry level stuff, but they are pretty much pioneers when it comes to the custom knife world. Hint as to what the next video is going to be. And they are also pretty revolutionary in finding the exotic materials to build these knives. And maybe one day I'll get into their significance along with the other companies that worked with them to come up with all these different super steels and all the things that make Buck knives one of the very pivotal families and companies for knife making in America. So, all right, that's everything on Buck knives that I can think of off the top of my head. Expect another video coming soon on something pretty cool. I'm pretty stoked. Like I said, I carried 2 Buck knives on the day of my wedding, and your other hint is custom shop. So I'll talk to you guys soon when I am able to show you what I got.